The morning frost clung to the Douglas fir branches like crystallized breath, creating a cathedral of silver silence that hunters know well. October 12, 1974, dawned clear and cold in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, where veteran outdoorsman Thomas Mitchell had planned to spend 3 days tracking Roosevelt elk through terrain he'd navigated for over 2 decades. At 53 years old, Mitchell possessed the kind of wilderness wisdom that comes only from countless seasons reading animal signs, weather patterns, and the subtle language of the forest floor. Mitchell had driven his battered Ford pickup truck up Forest Service Road 4290 before sunrise, parking at his usual trailhead near Cougar Creek. His hunting journal, meticulously maintained since 1962, recorded the temperature at 28 degrees Fahrenheit with no wind and excellent visibility. The conditions were perfect for what he expected would be a routine solo hunt in the remote wilderness area that stretched for miles without seeing another human soul. What Thomas Mitchell discovered that morning would haunt him for the rest of his life and launch an investigation that would span nearly 5 decades, consuming the careers of multiple detectives and challenging every assumption about how long buried secrets can remain hidden in the American wilderness. The case would become a testament to the persistent evolution of forensic science and the peculiar way that nature sometimes preserves evidence better than any climate-controlled evidence room. Mitchell's routine began as it always did. He loaded his Remington 30-06 rifle, checked his compass bearing, and started hiking north along the creek bed where game trails converged near a natural water source. The experienced hunter moved with practiced silence, his boots finding purchase on moss-covered rocks while his eyes scanned the forest for the telltale signs of elk movement. Fresh droppings, broken branches at shoulder height, and the distinctive oval impressions of cloven hooves in the soft earth near the creek. Approximately 2 miles from his truck, following a deer path that switchbacked up a steep ridge, Mitchell encountered something that didn't belong in his familiar landscape. A flash of unnatural color caught his peripheral vision through the dense undergrowth. Orange fabric, partially concealed beneath a fallen cedar log that appeared to have been there for years. Mitchell approached cautiously, his hunter's instincts immediately recognizing that whatever he was seeing had nothing to do with wildlife or natural forest debris. The orange material proved to be a hunting jacket, but not like any hunting gear Mitchell had seen before. The fabric was synthetic, clearly manufactured, with reflective strips and modern zippers that seemed oddly advanced for 1974. More disturbing still, the jacket wasn't empty. Skeletal remains, scattered by decades of weather and scavenging animals, lay partially concealed beneath the rotting log and surrounding vegetation. Mitchell, despite his extensive experience with field-dressed game and natural forest mortality, had never encountered human remains in the wilderness. The discovery shattered the morning's peaceful solitude. Mitchell's hands trembled as he backed away from the scene, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd stumbled upon. His first instinct was to preserve the area exactly as he'd found it, the same methodical approach he applied to tracking wounded game. He carefully marked the location using natural landmarks, noting the distinctive double-trunk maple tree approximately 30 yards south, and the large granite outcropping that would be visible even after seasonal changes altered the forest floor. Mitchell's hike back to his truck felt surreal, each step carrying him away from a mystery that would consume investigators for generations. The 2-hour drive to the nearest town of Cedar Falls gave him time to process what he'd witnessed, but nothing could have prepared him for the bureaucratic maze that would follow his report to local authorities. Small-town law enforcement in 1974 possessed neither the resources nor the expertise necessary to process a wilderness crime scene that might have been decades old. Sheriff Deputy Angela Rodriguez arrived at the Cedar Falls Sheriff's Department that afternoon to find Thomas Mitchell sitting in the waiting area, his hunting clothes still damp with morning dew and his weathered hands clasped tightly around a cup of coffee that had grown cold hours earlier. Mitchell's account of the discovery was precise and methodical, reflecting the attention to detail that had made him successful at reading the subtle signs of forest wildlife. He provided Deputy Rodriguez with hand-drawn maps showing the exact location of the remains, complete with compass bearings and estimated distances from recognizable landmarks. Rodriguez, 28 years old and fresh from the State Police Academy, had never worked a case involving skeletal remains discovered in remote wilderness. Her training had focused primarily on traffic violations, domestic disputes, and the occasional bar fight that characterized law enforcement in rural Washington communities. The prospect of coordinating a major crime scene investigation in challenging terrain, possibly involving a death that had occurred years or even decades earlier, represented a career-defining challenge that would test every skill she'd learned. The recovery operation began the following morning with a team that included Rodriguez, the county coroner, and 2 search and rescue volunteers familiar with the mountainous terrain. The October weather had turned cold and wet overnight, creating treacherous conditions for transporting equipment and personnel through dense forest to Mitchell's marked location. The team required nearly 4 hours to reach the site, carrying cameras, evidence collection materials, and basic forensic equipment up steep trails that were never intended for such specialized use. What they discovered challenged every assumption about how long evidence could remain preserved in wilderness conditions. The skeletal remains, while scattered and incomplete, after decades of exposure to weather and wildlife, showed signs of having been protected by the microclimate created beneath the fallen cedar log. More significantly, the synthetic hunting jacket had preserved crucial evidence that would prove instrumental to the investigation, though its full significance wouldn't be understood for nearly 50 years. The orange hunting jacket bore manufacturer's tags that were still partially legible, despite prolonged exposure to the elements. The brand name, Wilderness Pro, was embroidered in reflective thread along with a model number that would later prove crucial to establishing a timeline for when the victim had disappeared. More intriguingly, several pockets contained personal items that had survived decades of harsh mountain weather due to the jacket's water-resistant construction and protective positioning beneath the log. Deputy Rodriguez methodically photographed every aspect of the scene using the department's aging Polaroid camera, creating a visual record that would be scrutinized by investigators for decades to come. The scattered bone fragments were carefully collected and mapped according to their positions, while soil samples from the immediate area were preserved for future analysis. The hunting jacket and its contents were treated as the most significant pieces of evidence, wrapped in protective plastic and transported with extreme care back to the county facility. The initial examination revealed personal effects that painted a haunting portrait of someone who had vanished without explanation during what appeared to be a routine hunting trip. A water-damaged wallet contained the remnants of identification documents, their text obscured by years of moisture, but their presence suggesting that robbery had not been a motive. A small compass, its brass surface tarnished but still functional, bore an engraved inscription that would later provide investigators with their first concrete lead in identifying the victim. Most puzzling were the items that seemed oddly anachronistic for a 1974 discovery. The hunting jacket's advanced synthetic materials and sophisticated design features appeared more consistent with outdoor gear from the 1980s or even later. This temporal discrepancy would confound investigators and suggest that the case might be far more complex than a simple hunting accident or straightforward homicide from the early 1970s. The Cedar Falls Sheriff's Department found itself confronting a mystery that exceeded their investigative capabilities and resources. The remote location of the discovery, the advanced decomposition of the remains, and the technological limitations of 1970s forensic science created investigative challenges that would require assistance from state and federal agencies. Yet, even with expanded resources, The case would prove remarkably resistant to conventional detective work, establishing a pattern of frustration that would define the investigation for nearly 5 decades. The State Crime Laboratory in Olympia received the evidence from Cedar Falls on October 20, 1974, marking the beginning of what would become one of the most technically challenging investigations in Washington state history. Dr. Margaret Thornton, the lab's chief forensic pathologist, had examined hundreds of skeletal remains throughout her career. But the condition and context of the Cougar Creek discovery presented unique complications that pushed 1970s forensic capabilities to their absolute limits. The bone fragments, while remarkably preserved in some respects due to the protective forest environment, showed extensive damage from decades of exposure to freezing temperatures, seasonal flooding, and the natural processes of decomposition. Dr. Thornton's initial examination revealed evidence of trauma that could not be explained by environmental factors or animal scavenging. Several ribs showed clean breaks consistent with projectile impact, while damage to the skull suggested blunt force trauma that had occurred around the time of death. More puzzling was the forensic timeline that emerged from Dr. Thornton's analysis. Traditional methods for estimating time since death relied heavily on soft tissue decomposition rates, clothing deterioration patterns, and environmental factors that were difficult to quantify in wilderness settings. The advanced synthetic materials of the hunting jacket suggested a more recent death than the complete skeletonization would normally indicate, creating a temporal puzzle that defied conventional forensic interpretation. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Thornton discovered microscopic evidence embedded within the bone structure itself. Tiny metallic fragments, invisible to naked eye examination, but clearly visible under laboratory magnification, appeared to be remnants of a projectile that had fragmented upon impact. The composition and characteristics of these metal traces would prove crucial to the investigation, though the technology necessary to analyze them properly would not exist for another decade. Detective Lieutenant Frank Morrison assumed leadership of the case in November 1974, bringing 15 years of homicide investigation experience to what the state police had classified as their highest priority cold case. Morrison's methodical approach began with establishing the victim's identity, a process that proved far more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Missing person reports from the early 1970s yielded no matches for someone who might have disappeared while hunting in the Cascade Mountains region. The engraved compass found in the victim's jacket provided the investigation's first significant breakthrough. The inscription, though partially corroded, clearly read, "Happy 30th, love Janet," along with what appeared to be a date from 1969. This personal touch suggested a victim who had been loved and missed by someone. Yet no missing person reports correlated with the evidence. Morrison expanded his search to neighboring states, eventually casting a net that included missing persons cases from across the Pacific Northwest. Morrison's investigation revealed the peculiar challenges of tracking disappeared persons from an era before computerized databases and centralized record-keeping. Local sheriff's departments maintained their own filing systems, often with limited cross-referencing capabilities, making it possible for someone to vanish from one jurisdiction without other agencies ever learning of their disappearance. The detectives spent months traveling between small towns, manually reviewing paper files in dusty evidence rooms and basement storage facilities. The case consumed Morrison's professional life in ways that worried his supervisors and strained his family relationships. His wife, Carol, watched helplessly as her husband became increasingly obsessed with identifying the Cougar Creek victim, spending evenings and weekends pursuing leads that invariably ended in disappointment. Morrison's daughter later recalled entire family vacations that were disrupted by her father's need to visit yet another sheriff's department or interview another potential witness in a case that seemed to have no living witnesses. The breakthrough came in March 1975 when Morrison discovered a missing person report filed in Spokane County for Robert Bobby Hendricks, a 29-year-old construction worker who had failed to return from a solo hunting trip in October 1969. The timeline matched the compass inscription perfectly, and Hendricks' physical description was consistent with Dr. Thornton's forensic reconstruction of the victim's approximate age and build. More significantly, Hendricks had been known to hunt in the Cascade Mountains and owned hunting gear that included an orange safety jacket. Janet Hendricks, Bobby's widow, had remarried and moved to California years earlier, but Morrison tracked her down through marriage records and voter registration databases. The phone call that connected Morrison with Janet in her San Diego home marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. Janet confirmed that she had given Bobby the engraved compass for his 30th birthday in 1969, just months before his final hunting trip. Her description of Bobby's hunting equipment and his preferred wilderness areas aligned perfectly with the evidence recovered from Cougar Creek. The identification of Robert Hendricks transformed the investigation from a forensic puzzle into a homicide case with a specific victim, timeline, and geographic focus. Morrison's subsequent interview with Janet revealed crucial details about Bobby's final weeks, including his mention of meeting someone new who shared his passion for hunting and had suggested they explore new territory in the Cascades. Bobby had been excited about the prospect of hunting with an experienced guide who claimed to know secret locations where elk congregated during migration season. Janet's memory of Bobby's final phone call haunted Morrison's investigation for months afterward. Bobby had called from a payphone in Cedar Falls on October 15, 1969, explaining that his hunting partner had suggested camping in a remote area where cell phone coverage was non-existent. He promised to call again within 3 days, but never made that call. Janet's decision to wait a full week before reporting him missing reflected the casual attitude toward solo hunting trips that characterized the era, when men regularly disappeared into the wilderness for days without maintaining contact with family. Morrison's reconstruction of Bobby Hendricks' final days revealed a pattern that would prove crucial to understanding his murder. Bobby had arrived in Cedar Falls on October 14, 1969, checking into the Mountain View Motel and purchasing supplies at Morrison's Sporting Goods. Store records, miraculously preserved in the shop's basement, showed that Bobby had bought additional ammunition and camping equipment, suggesting he had planned for an extended hunting trip. The store owner's son remembered Bobby because he had asked specific questions about hunting regulations and the best areas for finding elk during the October season. The most significant lead emerged when Morrison interviewed other hunters who had been in the area during October 1969. Several recalled seeing Bobby in the company of an older man who drove a distinctive green pickup truck with out-of-state license plates. The man appeared to be in his 40s, with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone intimately familiar with the mountain terrain. Witnesses described him as friendly and knowledgeable, the type of person who naturally attracted the attention of less experienced hunters seeking guidance in unfamiliar territory. Morrison's investigation expanded to include an analysis of hunting licenses issued during October 1969, hoping to identify Bobby's mysterious companion through official records. The process revealed the bureaucratic chaos that characterized hunting regulation enforcement in the 1960s, when multiple agencies issued licenses without coordinated record-keeping. Some hunters purchased licenses in their home states, others bought them locally, and many hunted without proper documentation entirely, making it nearly impossible to create a comprehensive list of who had been in the Cascade Mountains during the relevant time frame. The detective's most promising lead came from a gas station attendant in Cedar Falls who remembered the green pickup truck because its driver had paid for fuel using an out-of-state check. The attendant had noted the transaction because accepting checks from non-locals violated station policy, but the customer had been persuasive and seemed trustworthy. Unfortunately, the station's financial records from 1969 had been destroyed years earlier, eliminating what might have been the investigation's most concrete evidence linking Bobby Hendricks to his killer. As 1975 progressed into 1976, Morrison found himself confronting the same investigative dead ends that would frustrate detectives for decades. The physical evidence from Cougar Creek had yielded its secrets through forensic analysis, providing confirmation that Bobby Hendricks had been murdered and offering tantalizing clues about the circumstances of his death. Yet the case lacked the crucial elements necessary for prosecution: surviving witnesses who could identify suspects, physical evidence linking specific individuals to the crime scene, or documentary proof of who had accompanied Bobby into the wilderness on his final hunting trip. The Hendricks investigation established patterns that would define cold case work for the next several decades. Dedicated investigators would pursue leads with obsessive determination, sacrificing personal relationships and career advancement for cases that seemed perpetually on the verge of resolution. Evidence would be re-examined using emerging forensic technologies, each advancement offering hope that new scientific capabilities might unlock secrets that had remained hidden for years or decades. The case that began with Thomas Mitchell's fateful discovery beneath a fallen cedar log would remain officially unsolved for another 46 years, though the investigation never truly stopped. Detective Morrison's meticulous work in the 1970s established the foundation that would eventually lead to justice, even as he retired without seeing the case resolved. The evidence he preserved, the witness statements he collected, and the patterns he identified became the inheritance passed down through generations of investigators who refused to let Bobby Hendricks be forgotten. In 2022, advances in DNA analysis and genetic genealogy finally provided the breakthrough that had eluded investigators for nearly 5 decades. Microscopic biological evidence recovered from Bobby's hunting jacket, previously too degraded for testing, yielded a genetic profile that led authorities to Harold Hank Kruger, an elderly man living in retirement in Arizona. Kruger's confession revealed the calculated nature of Bobby's murder, a crime motivated by robbery, and the killer's intimate knowledge of the remote wilderness that would conceal evidence for decades. Bobby Hendricks finally received the justice that Thomas Mitchell's careful observation had made possible, proving that sometimes the wilderness keeps its secrets not to protect the guilty, but to ensure that truth eventually finds its way to the surface. The case stands as a testament to the patient work of investigators across generations and the strange ways that nature itself can become an ally in the pursuit of justice, preserving evidence long enough for science to catch up with truth.